Ælfric the Doubter. Ferrum Thaumaturgus had been sent to NihtWyrtha under somewhat of a cloud. He was bound by sorrow and loss, a melancholia that hung over him like the ever-present roiling clouds of the island. To him, this was an exile, not one born from punishment, but a state imposed by duty, one he had no interest for, nor interest in coming to terms with. Librarians were not a respected part of his chapter. His mastering the warp-born powers that his chapter regarded as warp sorcery was not seen as an achievement, too unreal and chaotic from the machine spirit that their chapter sought to embrace ever more closely. The machine minds of the Iron Hands could not fit his brother's witchcraft powers into their ordered and calculable real-world view. Despite this, and always carrying a sense of shame, the librarians of the chapter fought between the machine spirit and warpcraft. But like his brothers, he strove to reach the pinnacle of status in his chapter, even though it came with a mantle of penance. He had objected to the posting most vehemently. Been positioned high in the librarius, he had calculated to replace Mentis as Mentor Psychana. He would still be a lesser member of his brethren, but at least he could earn a modicum of respect amongst the Martian cult, for if his flesh was still adorning his machine heart, his powers could enhance the machines they used. Been reassigned to a backwater world to undertake the founding of a new Astartes chapter, in a region of the Imperium everyone believed was destined for failure, was offensive to his sensibilities. He argued much in his defense that his skills were much better placed with the chapter, but every concern he raised was destined for rebuttal. In a sallow mood, he contemplated his lot in personal conclave. "Your place is there," Mentis had said. As the lone strike cruiser headed out of the populous Imperium to the cold, desolate stars of the Maelstrom Reach, he meditated in self-indulgent grief and loss of his chapter, who remained behind to carry on their duties, without loss for a lowly sorcery-tainted brother. The other Astartes in the ship with him been mostly tech marines. It was not as if he could vent, they thought it the greatest adventure. Perhaps only Lucius shared his feelings. The apothecary on occasion attempted to address Ferrum's bitterness, but he had come to terms with his new posting and only wished for the librarian to come at least halfway out of his disposition and look at the challenges. Ferrum did understand his efforts. Apothecaries were regarded with almost as much disdain by the chapter as librarians, for a brother wounded in battle was more likely to need aid of a mechanic than Medicaid. But in his mood, he could not bring himself to consider any form of bright side to his plight. Upon arriving on NihtWyrtha, he was appalled by it. The people lived in huts made of wood. They mixed organic matter with dirt to make a mockery of concrete for their walls that an Astartes could put his hand through without a power glove. The buildings smelt of burnt wood and wet dog. These animals of the Canis lupus familiaris were not the proud beasts of the space wolves. These creatures were small, not much bigger than space rats. They ran around untethered, barking like idiots, chasing waterfowl that waddled in the sludge-filled streets unattended. The place smelt. The ocean was on the air wherever he went on the island. The stench of raw, unprocessed fruit and vegetables in garish colors were displayed for sale in stalls in the open street. The rain was worse, though. It made everything wet. When it was not raining, there was a mist that soaked him all the same. His mechanical augments complained constantly, making him take many long, slippery walks to the Mechanicus workshops and beggar himself for parts and repair. It was degrading and beneath him. The wildlife was worse. On his many walks into the wilderness forests with trees as tall as a lance cannon, there were wild beasts. A thing called an Eotenbars, a bloated creature with fur like bristles and huge tusks that grunted at him but refrained from attacking after he planted fear in their minds. Small things like rats with sharp spikes all over their body, the locals called an Egil, that the children of the world sometimes kept as pets. What sort of creature evolves with spikes all over its body anyway? Clearly, at some point in humanity's past, a couple of generites had gotten drunk and moved the numbers around to come up with this abomination. Although he did notice the occasional orc spore cluster been gnawed away happily by the things, so grudging respect where it is needed. There were more dangerous things in the woods, though. creatures the size of an Astartes, he first took for men in fur cloaks. They played in the streams, catching fish with huge clawed hands. These Bara things kept to themselves when Astartes were around, but were known to attack men, or he was told. Most troubling to him were the wargs, slightly larger than the Bara. These creatures kept to the shadows, mimicking in shape the Canis lupus of the space wolves, and possibly a distant relation. They hunted in packs, stalking him as he traveled. These were the only creatures to try and attack him. Their minds offered resistance to his powers of instilling fear in their animal conscience. They only stopped when he cast lightning, but even after they would stalk him in shadows. It was the only time he had ever felt threatened on this feral world. He knew the Navis Astra Wigathane used these creatures in boarding actions, releasing them to run down prey in the confines of cramped compartments that must spread terror to their foes. No wonder the voidsmen of this world had such a fearful reputation in the Reach. Then there were the people, a hardy folk, stoic like his own people granted. Their speech was rough, low-pitched unlike the Iron Hands. In their speech he heard sounds and words that made it obvious it originated as High Gothic. But the language was archaic, more guttural than High Gothic. He found as he begrudgingly had to learn it, that he could understand its meaning before learning it fully. They had little fear, with a fatalistic attitude, not unusual in a people that sailed around in those awful boats of theirs. They were quick to laugh, finding the most unusual things amusing. Perhaps it was to be expected that a world as hard and harsh as NihtWyrtha would forge such a people the lives of which the first Astartes were born from. But it would take him years to admit that. For those first years on NihtWyrtha Farum avoided as much as possible his fellow Iron Hands, even Lucius, who now called himself Ælfstan. He quickly found his prize pupil in Cuthhelm, who had been a seer prior to becoming post-human. His powers had grown rapidly, and quickly became his primary librarian, aiding in training the other librarians, giving him time to find excuses to avoid the training dojo as much as he could. Farum had sulked in the most distraughtful way, all the way to the ocean planet. Now he sulked in the Iron Hands Fortress Monastery, NihtWyrtha Hall. He sulked in the temporary librarium sanctum, while a new tower was under construction for his librarians. That was until he found the hammering and bangs of the constant masonry work too distracting, so he went to find other places to sulk. He found many places to sulk, a quiet part of a tavern, the docks, the other docks, the forest, the far docks, until he finally and begrudgingly found his way to the Holmborg, and there he stopped sulking. The Holmborg was a massive mountain, not part of the mainland, separated as it was by the Brickthera Sowera, the Bridge of the Seers, a half-mile-long walkway made of stone, hewed so fine it was like ice. Passing its main gate and opening with sheer cliffs either side he entered. Through the gates the path went either side of the mountain, one way up, the other down. Servitors were busy working on a bunker that would guard the junction. The granite mountainside was been used as a rear wall, and the other sides of the structure were been assembled using ferrocrete walls. It had a gun slit which looked big enough to be for a heavy bolter, and not much else. It looked like one of Godric's designs. Water spilled down the side of the mountain, guttering out through the bunker entrance, which as yet lacked a door. Muddy water filled the bunker up to the lintel, spilling down. A Mechanicus priest stood in a foot of water inside the roofless structure. A servitor stood dutifully by his side, holding an umbraculum that whipped in the wind. The engineer caught Farum's eye. He looked as sullen as himself. Both men saluted, neither with enthusiasm, and the Iron Hand trudged on in the mud. First his feet led him downwards, following a curved path weaving in and out of the rock. The rainwater made a gushing river about his ankles as he walked. Whenever it banked, it spilled over the cliffside into the sea below. Farum avoided slipping. His Astartes boot grips held the ground as well as a starship grating. The Holmborg was stooped in history, and that history had slightly piqued Farum's librarian's interest. At the bottom the road bisected. One way led into the catacombs, the Bergen. He had no interest in looking at old rusty armor, so he took the other. Approaching Gostmir, the Spirit Lake, he gasped at the large oval hall, The lake filled it, glowing with eerie blue light. Looking up, he saw the cave was open to the sky. He knew the ritual. A great warrior was placed on a boat in the lake, his armor stored in the Bergen. Light would fill the hall as the spirit of the sea took the fallen into her embrace. Letting out a sigh, the lake was tidal. As the moon passed over top of the Holmbiorg, it reflected the local star into the chamber, and the sea, pulled by tidal forces, came in and took the body. This was not even trickery or sleight of hand. The seers just made use of nature and physics. There was nothing of worth here, other than misplaced superstition. Turning on his armored boot, he took the upward path. Rain poured down on him as he trudged up the path, in tune with his mood. He passed a tall arch and entered the hall of feasting and song, Simbalheel on Githus. Here was the place in festivals that would be lit by brazens with glowing kelp hanging from the roofs. Songs would be sung, and lots of food. He knew it was a trite way of getting rid of food that would spoil ready for the long winter, so lards could be restocked, then the remains eaten at start of long summer. Just practicality of people living on the edge of famine. The hall was huge. Columns of stone held up the mountain above, leaving long aisles where tables would be set up in feasting time. Scopes would sing songs, and warriors tell of their adventures and battles. All would be joy and laughter. The room smelt of rotted seaweed and damp ashes. Water dripped from the roof. He hung his head, moving on upwards, the weight in his power-armored soul pressing down in his boots. He followed a serpent carved in rock until sunlight filled the passage ahead, and he stepped into the huge warren of the Hālgengas, halls of healing. Here in times gone past, the greatest of leaders would be brought, wounds tended by the seers who sang songs of healing. Now it was Lucius' domain. In the guise of Ælfstan, he had moved his apothecary duties here. Once where boats were the only mode of transport and the forests blocked half the island, only the high-born could use the halls of healing. Now with hover plates and grav drives, Mechanicus adepts shipped the sick and wounded in and out of the halls. Today the place was a bustle of servitors tending the needy, the local folk with the ailments common on a feral world. Warg bites, splinters, swollen knees. True work went on in the sectioned-off parts. Astra Militarum medics did the skilled work, setting bones, gluing cuts, and amending ailments that 30 years ago would have been fatal. Medical auspex pinged, flash of lasers, comporting drone of machinery in halls where brazen sat empty and lumen rods glowed. A group of servitors were layering plasteel on one section, overseen by a Mechanicus engineer. Soon this place would be sealed, coated, and look like a proper medical bay, complete with exterior hangar that was been assembled. This was progress at least, but it just worsened his mood. He could still smell the ocean, and water still dripped, caught in buckets. The engineer saluted him. Ferrum gave a smile that had nothing to do with joy and moved on. Ducking under the stairway lintel, his power armor only just fitting as he began to ascend once again, following more serpent tails etched in the stonework. As he followed the winding stone stairs worn by millennia of bare and sandal feet, his armored footfalls parted the trickles of water that ran down them. All the passageways had carvings of the usual things related to hunting, sailing, fishing, picking crops. He noted a picture of a ship with full sail heading into a storm, the words "Fegaword" carved into the stone, letters softened by age. More local superstition. A stoic people, so beaten down by the half-year of summer and half-year of winter. Their fate was out of their hands, bound to their feral ocean world, these people becoming fatalistic to their position. So they took an attitude of been doomed, fated in desperation to make life worth living. In many ways, like the Iron Hands librarians. Cursed with warp powers that were an anathema to their flesh and mechanical-minded chapter. He let out a brief smile. Maybe the Iron Hands librarians were Fegword. Your place is there, Mentis had said, but he said it with knowing conviction. Moving ever upwards, he came to the Folkmote Hall, the meeting hall. In this place, rival kings or lords would come to settle disputes or to discuss a crisis, such as an impending flood or a dynastic marriage. It was a high chamber where a cleft in the mountainside shone light directly down on a table. All around the walls were clefts the size of a man that were empty. Each had a drape by it of silk cloth. The table was huge, wrought of stone with the precision of the bridge he had crossed to reach the mountain. It was round, and around it was placed many chairs. He knew about it already. Wulfgar had commissioned one just like it built in NihtWyrtha Hall. He had asked Godric to find a suitable stone mason. Farum pondered, lost in thought. The leaders of clans would meet here. The table being round meant no one was in a position of superiority. All the leaders sat as equals, no matter of rank. They would have discussion of their quarrel or crisis, and behind each drape a seer would stand, hidden by cloth, like a silenced chamber of a novice Astra-Wigathine capital ship. The seers would guide the outcome. As a librarian, he quite well understood the need to control his wayward leaders. Hot-headedness was not something a psyker can have as a personality trait. That being said, it was still sneaky. He had observed the considerable effect the seers had on the culture of the world and how the local population to be uncommonly psychic. For millennia, the Holmbiorg was the focal point of the ritual life of NihtWyrtha and home to the seers. Now he understood why. His despair grew heavier as he mockingly saluted the chamber with its idiot's table and moved on up the dripping stairs. Despite himself, he was beginning to feel his mind moving, his understanding clicking into place like a Mechanicus engine. Although it must have always been in the back of his mind, the storm in his heart had until now eluded him. Brother Osric on those occasions, Farum had failed to avoid him, had insisted on commenting on the numbers of passive psychers among the Astartes aspirants, far too low to be considered a lambda-level psyker by the Adeptus Astra Telepathica. Farum noted himself that he had been sent twice the usual number of Astartes for his Librarius program, but at the time he had only considered it inconvenient. Those not high enough on the scale he had handed over to Captain Tunbald. In effect, the second company under him was to be a seer company, as Cuthhelm described it. Not psychers, but all the low-level aspirants given seer training to shield their minds from the warp, what the locals called a warp shadow. They would act as standard Astartes, but be better at guarding against psychic attack, or so the thinking went. Such a concept would have given old Mentis a nervous breakdown. That made him smile. Now his training reasserted itself, and he began to wonder how come a world like so many others without imperial training had not been consumed by chaos by now, especially this close to the maelstrom, a literal rip in the fabric of reality that spewed raw chaos into the region. Farum had been preparing to become the leader of the Librarius for decades. In a few years he would have replaced Mentis. Bitterness welled up again and he fought to suppress it. "Your place is there," the Mentor Psychana's words echoing in his mind, a torment of his own making. It was raining then, too. When Mentis had uttered his fated doom proclamation, its cycle binary had been a pitiful campaign, one like too many in these modern times. The 35th millennium was turning out to be one of treason, insurrection, and strife, a hearkening back to the dim days of the Great Heresy. Council forces had been cleansing the system of the Adeptus Ministorum priests who had remained loyal to the High Lords of Terra. Witch trials had run day and night on Itzical Binary, until the Iron Hands came to restore order and sanity. The Adeptus Astartes as a galactic force had stayed their hand in the Nova Terra interregnum this far. It was not the place for Astartes to involve themselves in imperial politics. Both sides had issued orders to the various chapters to engage opposition forces. Calls fell on open ears that had no will to fight. Adeptus Astartes were the defenders of mankind, not its policemen. But the witch trials on Itzical Binary had been too far even for the Iron Hands' mechanical minds. Angels of Death, the citizens of the Imperium called Astartes. As Iron Hands drop pods crashed down on Itzical Binary 4, his chapter proved it an accurate description. Mentis had led their strike cruisers under the guns of the Navis Imperialis. The fleet had been ordered by the Council to destroy any ship not loyal to them. The captains and admirals sat watching as the Iron Hands smashed into the capital of the pro-Nova Terra loyalists and done nothing. Cowardice? Loyalty? They lived at least. 3 hours it took to restore the imprisoned High Lord's appointed governor and set free the Adeptus Ministorum priests who remained locked up in their churches awaiting trial. It was a pitiful battle, and Farum's last as an Iron Hand. As Farum had stood on the ramp of the Thunderhawk, Rain pouring on his black armor, washing off the mud and blood, he had looked back at Mentis. Your place is there. Farum was edging on despair as he warily climbed, going over the arguments he had with Mentis, feeling again every cut in his words like it were a power sword. As he ascended, he passed a large bas-relief and stood to look upon it. This was an epic. He knew the tale, Leoth Godwin's Thason Weersenden, the Lay of Godwin the Doubter, a cautionary story where a wayward, disloyal brother comes to understand his betrayal. So, the legend went, King Ælfric went on a journey to attend a wedding. While gone, his half-brother Godwin was hunting in the woods. He met a beast that convinced him to overthrow his brother. The beast sent creatures like wargs to aid him, monsters that stood like men with sharp claws and teeth and horns. In payment, it wanted the heads of 9,000 warriors from local holds. He was encouraged to attack. Holds fell in fire, and the bitter sacrifices were made. Ælfric returned, and on the field of battle below the palisade of Soothiheel, he convinced his brother of the error of his ways. The two brothers fought the beast, but even together they could not defeat it. And so Ælfric remained in battle in the great hall, keeping the monster's attention, while Godwin ran outside to call down the javelins on the hall, burning it to the ground, slaying both his brother and the beast locked in combat together. Godwin became king, having changed his ways, and was a fair and just ruler. A simple tale of betrayal, sacrifice, and redemption, with a poignant twist. Looking at the carvings of the beasts, he thought he saw something familiar, but shook his head. Archetypes are that for a reason, he mused. Water dripped on his pauldron. With a sinking feeling, he moved on. Reached the next level, the Hall of the Seers. Heal the Arashewera. Water dripped here too. He ducked his head to pass the wet drapes. He knew it had training dojos like the one in NihtWyrtha Hall. Some of the bigger halls even had them for local town seers trained. He was not that interested in seeing more, but it was filling his time. As a fellow psyker, he had noticed seers were all over the island. Even if not seen, then his immense powers of a master librarian made him aware of their presence. Small, tiny shadows in the warp, far more than a normal Imperial world's number of sanctioned psychers. Then again, most would not register on the scale. It was common on all new worlds for low-level psychers to be sent to Terra for training and be returned as fully trained and sanctioned psychers, or to serve the Emperor in a slightly different way. But the Arcana Inclusium was not close nor large enough for the Ministorum to get around to it. So it had been left to himself, and as time moved on, the Void Revenants to train seers as sanctioned psychers. That was fine on paper, but in the real world, it meant he personally had to view every seer on the planet. Thankfully, Cuthelm had now taken up this mantle. He was inside the seer's domain now, and he wondered for the first time why he never visited this place before. Was it arrogance or simple disinterest? All the seers had come to him when he requested them, so had never needed to visit. Moving silently so as not to disturb anyone in meditation, he moved through the slanted, dimly lit corridors. This was a honeycomb of passages that led to the living quarters of the seers. Larger chambers appeared to be used for training, dining, and meditation. He heard distant song, felt the minds of seers in contemplation, blending watchfulness with self-control. He stopped at a damp drape-shrouded dojo. Here one seer kneeled. She seemed alone at first, but 3 other combatants emerged from shadows. The 3 advanced on her with the staffs they used. He masked his presence in their minds so he could watch. The larger of the 3 would be attackers moved to one flank. A good opening move, Farum thought. The woman still sat kneeling in prayer, hands outstretched. He felt the powers at work. He was scanning for their life shadow. The shadow would shift in color, for want of a better word. Depending on mood, one of the 2 behind her flashed violet. He moved first, the flanker moving second, the third holding back slightly. In the realm of the psyker, he could see her positioning was perfect. Outstretched arms, she spread her presence, making her feelings, and so intent, hard to read. The stave came down on her head, but her head was not there. Using a power not unlike his own teleportation, she moved fast, faster than a human could see, but Farum could. She was bending the immaterial realm to slow time. In many ways, an Imperial Navis astropath does to channel a message through warp space. She moved to one side, using telekinesis to throw her body backwards and in a spinning spiral, tapping wooden seeks on the attacker's neck, landing behind the one who held back, running the practice weapon from top of head to base of spine. The third, who had flanked, tried to catch her with a light psychic bolt. She blocked it with a simple void ward while throwing blade at him. He tried a telekinetic push to deflect, but using the same skill she pulled him to her, wooden blade hitting the center of his chest. The three stood and bowed. The seer nodded to her fellows. Then they retook positions. Farum silently moved away, back to the stairway, masking the sounds of his armored boots so as not to interrupt the training. Unseen by him, the seer, now seated, hands held out in supplication once more, flashed one blue eye through the bolt of straw blonde hair that had fallen on one side of her pale face, to where he had been standing. A slight smile touched her lips for a second. As Farum walked quietly towards the stairs, lost in thought. The seer's powers were impressive for low-level psychers. They used their limited understanding of the immaterium to direct application of both self and surroundings. To an iron hand, this subtle use of powers was to be commended, he thought. Instead of great feats of power display, the seers on NihtWyrtha used their skills in direct world application. Reaching the stairway, he looked up at another bas-relief. He knew this tale too. Leoth Beorges Thorelhluftige, the Mountain and the Lady. In it, a powerful sorceress who danced an enchanting dance through the forest. Using her skill as a dancer, she gained a following of men and maidens who joined her display. But the seers warned the joy was fleeting, and to dance and not sow seeds and fish would lead to the starvation of Emtigwamsar. The people paid no heed, and Leoth had a worse winter as had been seen. The people starved, but danced harder for the lady, offered them mead and honey, if the gods heard their joy. They fell upon those who prepared for Leotnit in violence and dance. The seers knew the sea would be angry, that it had not been fished, and called all to the Holmberg. Only the faithful fled to the mountain, and the beasts and game followed, because they too feared the lady, whose songs and harp now covered the land in music of happiness. Sure enough, the sea in anger rose, drowning all but the faithful in the heights of the Holmbjorg. Those good and just retook their land after it had been washed clean. Farum, on first hearing the tale from Wulfgar, thought it an apt one for a land whose harvest was its lifeblood, and a tale to remind the people that lived on the edge of famine. It also reminded people the seers were wise and should be heeded. But as he looked up the stone carving, something nagged at him. He felt something about the image was wrong, but he could not put his mechanical finger on it. His mechanical parts questioned dryly how reality could explain the story. So seers at the time used the weather auspex and cognis signum the planet had in abundance to predict a storm flood. The dancers been killed in the flood were simply those who did not survive, been painted as bad to cover the seer's lack of convincing. Then he thought of the meeting hall and contemplated the different factors in his calculation. No, the seers would be able to their powers to convince the people, and the animals of the woods fled to the Holmborg too. Something startled the Forna and blinded the seers. Only one thing could do that Farum knew. But this was just a myth, wasn't it? He looked at the figure depicted of the dancing lady, his mind wondering. We all have a duty. Yours is not here. Your place is there, Mentis had said, grasping his power stave as water washed down his armor, pitted with bolter holes, smoking in the chill air. His single green eye lens glowing as he looked upon Farum. His back slightly hunched from the damage his armor had taken. But despite his years and battle damage, the Mentor Psychana was charged with his immense power. The other iron hands standing in the rain that poured down from the sky, falling through smoke blowing from the burning city, black rain falling on black-clad warriors. Farum stepped up on the Thunderhawk ramp, rain pouring down the front of the hatch onto him. He had turned to watch as the gunship's ramp raised shut. Words had failed him. He flexed his bionic hand, feeling the servos pull slightly off alignment. He would need to see the adept again. This damn planet. Water dripped from the stair roof onto him. He felt alone, ripped from his chapter, from his librarius. He moved on upwards, feet dragging, the feeling of gloom now replaced with a storm of conflicting thoughts. Reaching the very top of the stairs, there on a wide open space, rocks surrounded it jutting upwards, but there was a gap on all four sides, north, south, east, and west. Standing looking out over the island of NihtWyrtha was a figure, not as tall as an average NihtWyrtha native, wearing a white dress that clung to her slender form soaked by the rain. Her skin as pale as ash, long red hair blowing in the wind with some strands clumping with moisture. Gold and silver trinkets adorned her red locks that jingled in the air. Despite the chill in the air, she did not shiver, just looked out to the land, until she turned her pale blue eyes upon the Astartes librarian. She nodded to him the way the seer in the dojo had to her combatants, voice raising as she spoke against the wind. "What is thu nama?" she asked. Farum blinked at the wind, ignoring the light gusts of rain. His mouth opened, but no words came. Looking at the seer, he remembered the form of the dancing lady, then the beast in Godwyn the Doubter. He thought of all the seers, covering the island, all those psychers that on a normal barbarian world would have given a channel for the ruinous powers to spill across it, swallowing NihtWyrtha into the immaterium. But the way a dart fly could land on water without sinking, a seer had a soft tread on the surface of the immaterium going unnoticed. The few times daemons had invaded this cold, hard, windswept land, they were defeated with the seer's guidance, not power. The seers cleared the way for the Wigathane to fight, just as an Iron Hands librarian kept the immaterium at bay, so their mechanical and flesh Astartes could fight to protect the Imperium and humanity. He, Farum Thaumaturgus, was a psyker from another world, an elf, and he was the ruler, the chief librarian of the Void Revenants Astartes chapter, Rick, and his place was here. Farum stood tall, rain washing over him. "Min nama is Ælfric," he answered.